And welcome to another chat about antinatalism. We have antinatalist outreach here with us, who has been putting out all sorts of antinatalist material for a while now. He's like a bit of a missionary, spreading the word about antinatalism. Tell us, antinatalist outreach, how long have you been questioning the wisdom of replicating your DNA?
Good question. I'm in my mid-30s now. I would say I've questioned it since my teens, and I've really been against it in terms of thinking it's definitely not a good idea for anybody to have children. Since about 23 years of age.
Right.
So over 10 years.
Did you come to this idea with the help of other people, or did you realize it yourself? Did you read anybody or come across anyone on the internet? How did it happen?
I came across it with the help of other people in terms of my observations of suffering around me, seeing, the terrible pain that a lot of people are in mentally and physically, seeing the unfairness in the world and seeing the irreparable harm that is around us, and just like linking it all together and realizing, these people got a bad deal. These people got a raw deal in life, and realizing that life is a gamble. When you create someone, you're literally playing, you're gambling with their well-being, gambling with their existence. You don't know what's going to happen to them. You don't know what way they're going to turn out, what afflictions they're going to have. You are playing a genetic lottery, and you're also playing a lottery with any number of things that could happen to them in their lifetime. And I just realized that and thought, fuck, that's not very nice. It came that's how it came to me, that I just felt it wasn't a nice thing to do. It was kind of my own feelings, if you like. It was based on feelings. The logic of it and the reasoning came afterwards, in that, realizing that, there isn't any consent involved. And I suppose it's absolutely outrageous that we, impose death on people, we impose suffering, we impose the risk of suffering on people without their consent. When in life, in existence, we're not allowed to lay a finger on anybody really without their consent. So it doesn't make sense to me on that level.
Yeah, it's a tricky thought, because I think, I'm going to go back to my original question, which is my original point, which is, when did you first realize you didn't want to replicate your DNA? And I think that it's incredibly unusual for anyone to come to that realization at all, let alone at 23, and let alone by themselves. It's quite an astonishing thing. And the reason why it's astonishing, and I wouldn't sort of take any pride in it, because it's just luck, really. But the reason why it's astonishing is because, the DNA has done such a good job at creating the perfect circumstances for its proliferation.
Yeah,
in minds and bodies of humans.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've ever seen anyone die. I saw someone die quite close to me in my teens. They were actually an in-law, but they had cancer. And when I saw that, and the way it lingered for years, and just, they fought against it valiantly. They had chemo, they had, radiotherapy, and it still took them. And the harm it caused both them and their children, who had to continue life without a mother,
Mm.
I just that had an effect on me.
It's
That
funny
life.
because, you know,
Sorry.
I saw my own mother die of cancer, and she had a terrible time.
Mm,
But but I created a child afterwards, and
right.
it just never. It just that's one of the many things that I now look back, having found antinatalism, and like wonder. I mean, I know again it's because of DNA; it's done such a good job on us, but it never
Yeah.
occurred to me that her parents had put her through this, or that there's a you know, the very real possibility that one
Mm,
or more of my own children will have to go through something like that, and that, you know,
yeah.
it never occurred to me at the time of what
Mm, mm.
my mother.
Well,
The other
it's
thing about it,
sorry.
sorry, the other thing about it is that um, I kind of, I've kind of forgotten how bad it was.
Mm,
Kind of forgotten how
yeah.
bad it was. It's another. I think that's another thing that we do forget, the bad
Mm,
stuff
mm,
and the good stuff. But anyway,
yeah.
so yeah, so it never occurred to me, but obviously it occurred to you when you saw that.
Yeah. Yeah. It did. And also, I don't know why, but as a young child, when I saw people around me, and I was kind of more concerned with their suffering, and I seemed to be more concerned with their suffering than other people. Like, there's so many instances of it. I remember this old lady who used to come knocking on our door, looking for her sister who lived across the road. Now, her sister had died 10 years before, and this old lady had serious dementia, Alzheimer's, the lady who was knocking on the door. And that was just her life. She was going around confused, knocking on people's doors, you know, looking sad, looking worried, you know, completely bewildered, completely, you know, in her own little world and lost. And very sad and very confused. And she was wondering where her sister was, couldn't remember that her sister had died. And she was just in this eternal state of being confused and upset and just not knowing what was going on. But that had an effect on me as well. And then, you know, it's just seeing the kind of human nature, really, seeing how we treat each other. You know, I was always quite perplexed as a child that, you know, each evening we'd watch the news and I'd sit there looking at, you know, famines. I'd sit there looking at wars, looking at, you know, miscarriages of justice, looking at murder trials, looking at, you know, pedophilia, you know, celebrities dying of cancer, heart attacks, you know. It was all laid out on the news every fucking day. And, you know, every headline I read on my father's newspaper seemed to be bad news. And that just really was perplexing to me. Like, why is it that every day, you know, so much bad news is coming to us? And yet, you know, somehow we think this is a good game to play. It's good to create life. Yeah, I just found it bamboozling that so much bad news is pushed into our faces. It's all there, you know, it's self-evident. Everything is there for us to see, but we literally turn our heads and look away somehow when it comes to procreation.
Mm. I think that a lot of people might say that, well, the news is deliberately created as a, you know, as a form of entertainment, and it's much more entertaining to show people doing bad stuff than it is people showing good stuff, and therefore the news is bombarding you with that information, but it doesn't give you, you know, the important thing about, and we'll hopefully speak about COVID maybe a little later, but the important thing about, for me, the significant thing about COVID was the way the things were reported. They weren't given proper statistical context. Yeah.
Yeah,
So like when the news happens, it's not given statistical context, and the truth is that most people do not go through those experiences. Most people do not are not involved in school shootings or whatever it is, or even in in war. The overwhelming majority of people are not. And so you might have a counter argument to what you're saying. Might be, for example, having to watch a travel program the other day, and it was about it was this guy going across Latin America and other areas with no money, and just asking people to be kind to him. He wouldn't accept any money, but he would accept somewhere to live and some food. That's all he wanted, and he wanted just traveling, seeing if he could get around that way. And the whole thing shows how many people were prepared to help him and everything. And so there are lots of very, very good things happening in the world. There are lots of people doing lots of really great things for other people. There are lots of people having
undoubtedly
good times and enjoyment, and many of them, not all of them, but many of them, myself included, would say that the overwhelming majority of their lives are either neutral or okay or quite nice. And then there are parts of their lives that are painful, but they are only a small part of their lives. So how would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, it's not, first of all, my argument would be, it's not all about you. It's not all about me. Okay. There are obviously people in this world who get an unbelievably bad deal. There's little children born into homes or into communities where they will be molested to mental illness, bullied to suicide. I mean, these are inevitabilities of creating people. Somebody is going to get a bad deal. If you look back at your yearbook of your school or your class in primary school, and if you could go in and find out how many of those people are suffering from extreme mental illness, how many of those people have committed suicide, how many of them have died from cancer or heart disease or some other horrible way, how many of them have inflicted suffering on others? So how many of them are pedophiles, rapists, possibly murderers? How many of them politicians? How many of them are psychopathic businessmen who are literally manipulating people for their own ends and causing terrible, terrible harm to people, pushing addictive products, unhealthy products, or some kind of financial incentive that's damaging in the long run, bad credit and stuff. So yeah, I'd argue that I think we're naive when it comes to how bad it is, or even ourselves. We focus on the good because we have to. Because if we think about the bad, it's overwhelming, and that's why people end up depressed or in mental homes, because they stare the void in they stare at the abscess. They look deep into the futility of the world and the pain and suffering, and it is overwhelming. It's not a nice thing. So it will take yourself, Danny. Yes, you're happy so far, but you do know that the future holds terrible potential for suffering. And the truth is, as you get older, that potential is growing more and more likely. So we are, unfortunately, as a species, very gung-ho about life, and we're very positive about it when it's going well for us. We'll sing it from the treetops, how wonderful it is to be alive. But unfortunately, when we get unwell, when we suffer from the harsh effects of life, when we get depressed, when we get ill physically, cancer or such, well, we have to retreat. So we end up in our rooms, we end up in our deathbeds, we end up in hospital, and we're not in a fit state to sing songs about how bad it is. So unfortunately, the world is getting an unfair promotion of a small percentile of life, that where people are, ecstatically happy. And I would argue that being ecstatically happy is also a state of ignorance, because it's very, very selfish, isn't it? How can you be happy knowing that there are, people suffering terribly in the world? I would argue that happiness in and of itself isn't a very nice thing, because it's really forgetting about what's going on, and it's selfish. I'm not saying I don't want you to be happy, but I'm saying that there is a side to happiness where it's denying reality. It's denying, I'm happy, like what, but what am I happy about? I'm happy about something stupid, something, futile, something silly, where there's a little girl out there being molested. There's, a little boy being bullied to suicide. There's a teenage girl, worried about the size of her buttocks, and, she's pondering suicide because she thinks she's too fat. There's an old man, with really terrible arthritis. He can't even climb up the stairs to his flat where he's living alone, because he worked for so many years on a building site, earning very little amounts of money for a psychopathic boss. And that little old man is suffering terribly with his pains and his inflamed joints. And, he's lonely. He drinks a bit too much, and he's going to die there one day by himself. He's going to keel over, and no one's going to know he's there. Maybe 6 months later, the police will kick the door in and find his moldy face stuck to the carpet. And that will be that. The old man will have passed away, gone on, and, they'll go home and impregnate their wives, because, we don't think about what is going on for the individuals who have it bad. We don't think about it. We don't really care.
It's funny. You said earlier on, I watched a small clip of In England, and you said earlier on something like about, like we're gung ho about how life is so great, yeah. And In England said something like, well, if life is really that good, then why don't people just lead it and lead a great life, rather than having to like bring someone else to lead a so-called great life with all that risk involved? When it just like, if it's that good, just lead a great life,
Right. Right. Well, that's because, I've heard it said so many times, people say, oh, my life wasn't great, or it wasn't, I didn't find meaning until I had a child, and they filled this void. They filled this, lack of meaning. And now I live for my child. My child is the meaning. And I find that a ridiculous sentiment, because to say that, there was a void, there was a gap in your life before you had a child, and then you had the child and it was filled. Well, what are you doing? Only passing on this void to another generation, and if that's the way you think, well, is it not the possibility that your child may not be able to ever fill that void, may not be able to have a child because, they're infertile or whatever. So really you're presenting them a problem, and it's not a very admirable thing to do in my eyes.
Well, I mean, yeah, when I look back at it, now I can see that all the reasons for having children don't really add up at all. So, to fill the void is just as bad a reason or good a reason as any of the other reasons. And also that is just another, example of why it's actually selfish. I don't even know if that's the right word, but why that the decision is made by almost everybody based on themselves and not on the child.
It's never in the child's interest to be born, and it is a selfish action, creating a child. But I would argue, in most cases, it's ignorant more than selfish, because the parents just don't think about it, and they are being led, as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, by 3.5 billion years of evolution. That's driving this beast. So we can't be too angry or too hurtful towards the parents, because it's a bit like, I'm not a Christian, but it's a bit like that Jesus statement where he says, forgive them for they know not what they do. And it kind of is like that, because I'm sure if the parents realized, the harm that they are creating the potential for, and indeed the suffering and the future death that they are inflicting on their child, okay, I'm sure, the vast majority of them would say, hold on, they'd at least think about it, before they did it. But we don't, do we? We meet somebody, we meet a beautiful woman, they meet a guy that they like, and we fall in love, and it tricks us, we fuck, and it feels good to fuck without a condom, so we do it. And lo and behold, 70, 80 years later, there's a poor human being sitting in an old people's home, with very poor levels of mobility, aches and pains everywhere, possible Alzheimer's. Sorry.
No, I'm just like, I wanted to talk to you about sex.
Yeah.
Well,
I hope it's not going to be. You're not trying to turn me on here, are you? I'm joking, but that was a bit of a bolt from the blue. Danny wants to talk to me about sex. What are you wearing, Danny?
Not very much.
Oh fuck! Hold on, let's get a bowl. I'm going to get sick. Go on.
No, it's just how the way you've sort of, the way you've painted it there. Just to think that, 80 years ago, some just average Joe went down the pub one night, and and he liked the feeling of dipping his wick in, that little few seconds of pleasure, and then fast forward to it just makes sex just so. I mean, it's just horrible.
Well, it is.
So it's terrible. It's beyond. I mean, and I think I've been speaking to someone about creating some material like alternative sex education, where sex is this just terrible thing. It's so nasty. Whoever created that, it's just like,
well, it's
so mean. The meanest trick.
It feels so good. It feels so good, and yet it feels so good, and yet it does all the harm. It does all the fucking harm, which is very, very sad. Very sad. It seems to be like that in life. Many of the things we like are really, really bad for us, and perhaps the most pleasurable, the orgasm, is the most harmful of all, because it's not only harmful. It's harmful for other people. It's harmful for the life we can create with it.
And and a lot of people would probably be really triggered by the idea that a lot of antinatalists. I don't know what you would think, but do you think that actually also think that making a woman pregnant is harming her potentially?
Well, I would argue that yes, it's a very dangerous thing to do, because even if a woman says she doesn't want a child, when a lady is impregnated, things can change. The evolution has created these hormones that can change a woman's mindset, and when she is pregnant, when she finds out she's pregnant, these hormones are doing work behind the scenes, making her feel maternal, making her go into protection mode, and she can change her mind. I've seen it before. Women, say I don't want to have a kid, and then suddenly they're pregnant, and then they decide to have the child, and then they come out with all the, it's wonderful, this child makes me so happy, and it's wonderful, it's amazing. And I've seen it so many times in my own life with really depressed females who are on medication, really unhappy individuals, really traumatized individuals, and by the way, that's most human beings. And they say, oh no, I don't have a child, no, and then you meet them less than a year later, and they're pushing a pram. And you can't say anything because you don't want to upset them. But there's a little voice in your head going, "What the fuck?" If your baby knew what you said, a year ago, and now they're here, what would they think? And then I've seen so many that these couples, they break up. The husband's found cheating with his secretary or whatever, and then the single mother.
That's another thing. Another way that this bloody sex thing gets you in trouble. Well,
it's continuous. It's a continuous.
It's just a bit of friction, and look what damage it does.
I know. Like, there's no doubt about it. Males, we have we're insatiable for the most part, most of us, and we just want sex. It's on the brain, especially when we're younger. Like, thankfully, testosterone starts to drop a bit as you get older. But when we're young, when we're healthy or whatever, it's kind of what we think about and what we want to do, and we're willing to lie for it. We're willing to, be pompous idiots for it. We're willing to brag for it. We're willing to, say what we got to say just to, seduce a lady into opening her legs. And all, let's be honest, guys, all we're thinking about is titties and ass. All we're thinking about is grabbing hold of her and fucking her. All right. We're not thinking about down the line and, the possible result of that sex, which is a human being, a sentient organism who's going to have feelings, who's going to have thoughts, who's going to have to figure their way around this dark world, and who's going to have to perhaps overcome hurdles, who's going to perhaps be oppressed in some way, who might have a terrible disability or affliction, who might be exploited in some way, financially, emotionally, and who ultimately will die, perhaps horribly, from cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, whatever. We're not thinking about that because all we're thinking about is sucking on some big titties and filling a buxom blonde up with a load of spunk. That's it.
I know but it's just so, and there's nothing in the education about it.
No.
Nothing in education. No one ever tells us.
I remember my sex education. I think we got like a little pamphlet when we were about 12 or something, around that age, the onset of puberty, and it just had and all it was and when the man's penis gets erect or becomes full of blood, he puts it into the woman's vagina. That was it. There was nothing else about the consequences of this. I mean, we didn't even learn about STDs. We didn't even learn about STDs at that age.
Wow.
And perhaps life is the biggest STD there is. Life is the most harmful STD.
Okay, so I want to talking about STDs. Talking about.
So can I just make can we just reaffirm the point though? There are joys in life.
Yeah.
But are any of the joys worth a child with brain cancer? That is the question. Are any of the sights she could see in the world, or any of the joys she could have by cycling her bike down in the park, walking around with a balloon that's in the shape of a flamingo, is any of it worth her having a tumor the size of a football growing in her brain, pushing down on her eyes so she can't see, and she's in immense pain, and she will inevitably die from such a horrible thing? Is anything worth that risk? And knowing that is a risk, somebody's got to get this. Somebody's got to get the raw deal in life. And knowing that these risks, these things happen, why do we impose the risk on others? Well, we don't want, Danny, we don't want these things to happen to ourselves. I don't want to get brain cancer. Do you? Do you want to get brain cancer, Danny?
No.
Okay. Do you want to be raped and tied up and subjected to all manners of horror and to the point of mental illness and suicide?
Not to the point of mental illness and suicide.
Right. Do you want to be bullied and harangued and humiliated by vast hordes of psychopaths?
No.
Okay.
Don't even. But I don't even want to be bullied and harangued by my own children.
Right. Okay. So knowing these are things we don't want, why do we impose these risks on other people? I mean, let's go to the basics of it. Do you want to die?
Yes and no. I
Okay.
don't really fancy the process of dying, but what I would say is, and this is sort of in a way a positive slant on antinatalist thinking, or certainly my antinatalist thinking, which is that I think that no matter how bad anyone has been in this world, that when we die, that's the end of it. It's the end of all suffering, all problems, and finito, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good bit of news, as
Right.
opposed to what the religions say that you have to go to heaven or hell. But no, I don't want to. It's not that I want to live forever.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go through the dying process.
Yes. Yes. I see. But when we have a child, we impose that on others, which isn't nice in my view, which isn't a good thing to do, which isn't right. Imposing things we don't want on others doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah. I mean, another thought that I had in my last conversation is that people ask, like, you know, if you were asked for consent, would you have said yes to being born? Yeah, which is not the right question, because the right question would be, would you consent without knowing how it would turn out? Would you consent to being born? Yeah. So the way I look at that is, for example, I would not like to have been born a woman, because I wouldn't like to have gone through, you know, years of periods and pain of birth and all this stuff. I just don't. I mean, you know, difficult enough being a man, but I wouldn't like to be a woman. That's my personal thing as a man. Right. Obviously, if I was born a woman, I'd probably think differently, right? But having said that, I imposed womanhood on one person and manhood on two. But I did impose womanhood on one person, even though I wouldn't want to be a woman. And now she is. I mean, she's, again, as a woman, as a young woman, she recently told me more than happy that she's a woman, and that's fine, right? But I wouldn't want to do that. And like you say, and there's lots of other things I wouldn't want to, you know, I wouldn't want to be either born with or a parent of. Lots of other situations that I wouldn't want to, and that nobody would want to. Nobody actively wants to have a child.
But yet it could happen.
What's that? Yeah, but
it could happen.
Could happen. Yeah, absolutely.
And you're willing to impose a risk of something that you don't want on somebody else. And if it does happen, what you're going to do? Shrug your shoulders and say, "That's life." You know, I don't think that's good enough. I just think that's terrible. No, as you say, nobody wants their children to suffer, but they know it's a risk, and they're willing to fucking put that risk on their children. These are people who are meant to love you more than anybody else. You know, our parents are meant to love us more than anybody else in the world.
I think the thing is, though, I think that they, you know, in many cases, I'm sure it's true they love you more than anything else in the world.
Well, they do. They
are ignorant of the fact that they've you know, that they have caused unnecessary, all your unnecessary suffering, and all the suffering that they're also ignorant. Often they're very ignorant of the suffering that their children cause other people and to the environment and to animals, etc. It's just ignorant.
Well, I think, to be honest with you, I think
when you ask when you ask me those questions, I can't figure out any decent way of answering them, and I'm kind of thinking I'd like to sort of open it. I'd like to sort of, I think it would be interesting to have a Zoom meeting or even a live meeting of some antinatalists and of some natalists, and, like, you know, ask them these questions. I can't think of any answers to these questions. There might be good answers to them. I haven't found them. It just seems, now that you ask them, it just seems so obvious. But the problem is that the state of the people, the way that they've been conditioned and brainwashed, and also the way they've been the way that DNA has evolved, or that humanity has evolved, and DNA has managed to get us to evolve to such a state that the people are in a state of such ignorance that they don't even know the questions to ask.
No. Well, let's be honest. We weren't even talking about evolution as children, really. I wasn't. So, I grew up a Catholic, and it wasn't even talked about. So it's no surprise that as a society, as a humanity, we're not talking about these things, where we've barely got evolution on the agenda, especially in America. So, considering that, once we truly understand evolution, once we accept that as fact, and I don't know how anybody couldn't, well, I think that really has to, put into people's minds, the question of what the fuck is going on here, a loving God didn't.
I just want to put that in there, right? Because I think it's possible to be skeptical about everything, including evolution. And there are people that are skeptical of evolution. But I don't want people who are skeptical of evolution to think that they should be natalists. Because
because the truth is
no excuse for bringing someone into existence and putting them at risk of so many different things, and also not just at risk, but guaranteed certain forms of
suffering and death. Suffering and death are guaranteed, exactly.
Yeah,
and as you say, sometimes they can be terrible.
Yeah.
But sorry, can we just go? You can save that from write that down if you want to ask me in a minute. But go back to this suffering and death. The other point to make is the joys in this world. They say they're worth the suffering, but you put it this way: suffering. If for example, somebody was out on their skateboard or driving along in their car, and a juggernaut came around the corner and mowed them over, and they became paralyzed from the neck down, or they got some type of injury that caused them immense chronic ongoing pain. Well, that condition is ongoing, and I don't know of any joy that is chronic, that is ongoing, that doesn't stop. Joy to me is fleeting. It's fleeting, and it doesn't last very long. Orgasms don't last very long unless you're very lucky and you were born a pig.
It's funny you say that. I agree with you on that, and that's why one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is a slow release cannabis patch that you can put on first thing in the morning, and it releases cannabis into your system so that you can be joyful like the whole day until you go to sleep.
That sounds good, but what I would say is, I was going to make a point that still suffering to me seems to be the only real thing that we can be sure of. You are definitely suffering. When you're suffering, you're suffering. But when you're feeling joy and you're happy, it might be a lie. For example, you could be happy with a partner, they're cheating on you. Do you know what I'm saying? Joy and pleasure are not always the truth. You could be at this point in life where you think, this is great, I'm having a great time here, I've just done my house up, but you've just breathed in some MDF dust and you're going to get cancer in 5-10 years, from cutting the laminated flooring.
I think it's a little bit, I think we can allow people to,
I'm just saying joy and pleasure can be misguided. I don't think suffering is usually, when you're feeling bad, when you are suffering, for the most part, 99% of cases, it's real. It's fucking real.
Well, you say that, right? But I would say something different. I would say that there would definitely be people that would say that actually suffering itself is a perception of reality, and it's created by thinking. and
Yes.
therefore you can certainly mitigate it, or you can reduce it by thinking differently about it. Pain is something different.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I'm when I'm in this instance, I'm talking about pain, really. Pain that you can't really think away pain. I don't think you can.
some people think you can, and in
Some
fact,
people think you can.
there's a seminar tomorrow night with Dr. Phil Parker, who speaks exactly
Right.
about how to limit and minimize pain using certain mental processes.
Well, you see, the problem with these people who say you can do these things, they're not taking into account that everybody has different intellectual abilities.
I agree.
That's the unfortunate thing. You're saying you can do this. Well, there's no guarantee that your child will have the intellectual capacity to do it, let alone understand what the fuck you're talking about. So, unfortunately,
I agree. And the thing is that I think your main point is that it's how much pain, how much pleasure. Sorry, like
pleasure's fleeting.
Yeah, no. Your main point is that if a child is in a terrible, there are certain people who have so much pain and are in such bad situations that no amount of orgasms or nice pretty pictures or nice trips can possibly justify that kind of thing. That's what your argument is, right?
Well, it can't make up for it. It can't compensate. And these assholes will say then, well, there's always suicide. These people can kill themselves, but even that is not a nice thing to impose on somebody. I mean, you don't want to die. You don't want to kill yourself. So why are you pushing that as a solution for other people who perhaps might be afraid of death, or
I do think
afraid of the unknown?
There is an argument, though. There is an argument that if you take antinatalism's logical conclusion, you could argue that actually, the pro-mortalist argument, which is that actually you should kill yourself, right, to reduce suffering that you're going to experience and produce suffering. Hold on a second. And reduce suffering that you inflict on others. But I actually, since I've been into these ideas, I actually think that, and Mendham speaks about this a little bit. I actually think that for me to commit suicide now, not only would I be doing a huge disservice to my family and some of my friends, but I'd be doing a huge disservice to the world, because because I'm just leaving it to carry on with its mess rather than trying to raise awareness about these questions, so that I can help prevent even one person from being, being brought into existence. So therefore, I don't think it's right for me to commit suicide, because the whole ideas of this are based on the compassion, for.
That's right. So, if we do kill ourselves, well, what are we doing? We're basically not putting this out there. We're not campaigning for people to be antinatalist. We're not campaigning for people to stop bringing people into the world. And if we don't do that, who the fuck else is going to do it? It's just going to be more of the same. And unfortunately, some people have to take on this burden and put this information out there, put it into the faces of people, so they have to look at it and they can't deny it's there.
Yeah, to be fair, it doesn't have to be looked on as a burden, and I don't think you and I do that, because your stuff is quite it's quite sort of, I don't know, it's ironic a bit, it's a bit funny, it's a bit, it's not, I don't know, did you see it as a burden doing anything?
Sometimes I do. I'll be honest, sometimes I wish I'd never, sometimes I wish I'd never been born at all, but sometimes I wish I wasn't an antinatalist, in that it's easier not to be, it's easier to go with the grain. But then again, that's in terms of being popular, I suppose. It's easier to be liked and popular if you just say whatever other people want you to say and just do what other people are doing. So in that instance,
now with the internet, you don't need to do that anymore.
No, you don't need to do that anymore.
You can be popular just because you're an antinatalist.
Yeah, but it can be frustrating. Come on, man. We're fighting we're talking against, you know, 99% of human beings' ideologies, and it's very difficult. So it can be frustrating, you know, when, you know, you talk about all the merits of antinatalism, you go into the ins and outs of it, and it's not complicated. You know, it's not complicated. It's fucking obvious. It's self-evident. And, you know, there's a little bit of their brains that just goes, but life is a gift, you know, and or that's life. And, you know, they don't engage with us fully. You know, they'll ignore our memes, they'll ignore our tweets. And yeah, they just don't want to know, unfortunately.
It's fair enough. It's a heavy one. It's a bitter pill to swallow as a parent, I can tell you.
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of denial that goes on. We were talking about this earlier. I think there's takes ignorance to bring somebody into the world. And I'm not going to blame people for that because, you know, I love my parents. It's not their fault. It's just, this is what biology is doing. But, you know, I think that most parents eventually think these things. I think they do when they see their children suffering in some way or other, or when they face cancer themselves, when the parents are on their deathbed. Surely a lot of them are thinking, fuck, this life sucks, and I've just bestowed this upon this lot. This poor fuckers, my children.
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
Really? I think a lot of parents are too embarrassed, or, you know, they're in denial. They don't want to admit it. You know, maybe. They don't want to admit that there was no need for any of this. There was no need for my child to suffer. You know, there's no need for this. Yeah. I just, because
yeah, sorry,
go ahead.
No, I wanted to move on, but if you want to finish up what you're saying.
No, go ahead. We can talk another day.
Move on, and just to sort of wind up slowly, but I particularly want to move on with the COVID situation and how that relates to antinatalism. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it's very interesting. It's very interesting how we're worried about causing the death of others. Like, we're worried. We're wearing masks. We're trying to keep our social distance to stop people dying horribly, perhaps horribly. I mean, there's a 1% chance of them, you know, getting this COVID.
By the way, is it any more horrible than getting cancer?
This is what I'm saying. This is exactly, you know, you beat me to my point. So I don't know, there's a 1% chance that they'll die off this COVID.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, we're not worried about having a child and them having perhaps a 50% chance of getting cancer. And I don't know what the rate is of death, but maybe 16%, 20% chance of dying horribly from cancer, you know, which is a much higher chance than COVID. And then there's all the other opportunities for harm and suffering, you know, on the way to getting cancer and dying from cancer. You know, there's, you know, I read somewhere lately that nearly 1 in 4 children get sexually abused. And it's a similar statistic for women who are raped. And every 40 seconds, someone commits suicide, you know. The actual rate for people who attempt suicide is much, much higher, because most suicide attempts obviously don't end in death.
Yeah.
So yeah, my point is, and you made it as well. The point is, we seem to be worried about being killed by a strange coronavirus that has a very low death rate, but we're not worried about causing death in other ways for people, and we're not worried about imposing harm on others by creating them, which is weird.
Yeah, I know. It's very strange, but it's the way DNA has managed to manipulate our bodies and minds to not even think like that. But it's quite interesting, like you say, that we've got this new consciousness about how we don't go out without masks on, because some chain of events might happen. You might then cough on someone, and we don't know exactly how it carries, and they might then meet someone who's who might be, old,
Yeah.
who is old, and they might have other things, and then they might end up, and they go on and on and on, and it might end up with someone dying, yeah, as opposed to making a woman, like a man making a woman pregnant, which will create someone that will definitely die, probably in a really nasty way, that will definitely suffer, sometimes quite possibly in a horrible way, and that will definitely cause suffering to other people and to the environment.
Yes.
Yeah? So surely,
Yes.
surely
it seems to be a strange double standard, a strange, cognitive dissonance that people just don't want to see,
Yeah. Okay.
By the way, we never touched on it, but I also think that we need to find a way to prevent all life from replicating. And I think that anyway. So
yeah,
I think that the natural world,
very briefly now, but perhaps that's for another conversation. What you're saying is that animal suffering that is going on out there is also not necessary, and I mean, certainly the factory farming situation is an absolute, as far as I'm concerned, just most horrific stain on human. It's another reason why we shouldn't be reproducing if we're going to be reproducing people who are just going to be carrying on with this systematic, horrendous abuse of sentient beings.
But I argue that, and I know you argue the same, that even without human interaction, the natural world is itself a horrible meat grinder. And, animals suffer immensely just by being born into the natural world. I'm the type of person, when I used to watch, David Attenborough programs when I was a kid, I wasn't like in awe of these lions going around, tearing these zebras into shreds. I was thinking this is grotesque and horrific, and we're in hell, because these are sentient creatures just like you and me, and they're just going about their business, doing what they've, being biologically programmed to do, and yet they're dying horribly, and the lions are just doing what they're doing as well. They're programmed to do this, and they're victims as well. I mean, they get cancer, they starve to death, and they also get torn to shreds as well. So it's one big horrible meat grinder, and if I could find a way of stopping it all, I happily would.
Right. Okay, well, we'll leave that on that wonderful positive note. And it's been really, really good to speak to you, and hopefully we'll speak again. And stay safe in the bedroom, control DNA, and save lives from coming into existence.
That's right. Don't be an imposer of harm. Don't make anybody die. Thank you very much. We'll talk soon.
Bye.